I'm not greasy. I just got out of the shower, okay? So don't judge me. Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today. It appears we have a bit of a mini series on the channel. A lot of you guys like the where is it, what's happening video, so I thought I'd do another one. This one for a particular piece of DLC that I have been begging for a lot of months. So The Outer Worlds came out last October. I adored this game. It was sort of that Fallout fix I was looking for many, many years, and I know a lot of people felt the same way. Some were disappointed by it, and I understand that because it didn't have the biggest budget, and so it couldn't do as much as it clearly wanted to. But for what the game was, I truly enjoyed it quite a bit. So naturally, like many greedy gamers, I wanted more. That brings us to this DLC conversation we're having, because back before The Outer Worlds launched, Obsidian had stated that they were open to giving us DLC in the form of science weapons. These were the, I put this in quotes, unique weapons of the game. They had all their own characteristics, like there was one called the Mandibulator Rearranger, where you would just hit someone and their face would drastically stretch apart. It was a very goofy melee weapon, but it was also very much Obsidian. So I was sort of expecting small weapon packs to come out for this game and nothing in the terms of story, because I know this game was made and then they were seemingly ready to move on. But I think because of The Outer Worlds sales and how it exceeded expectations, as well as its Game Pass numbers, Obsidian changed their minds and moved forward with what seems like much bigger DLC. This brings us to our current scenario. You have The Outer Worlds releasing on Switch in just 2 short weeks. 2 weeks. I can't wait, guys. I cannot wait, because now that we know that this game is coming with a cartridge, isn't that crazy, right? I'm celebrating this, but now that we know it's coming with a cartridge, you bet your butt I am copping this thing physically. I'm starting to build up that game collection again, my physical game collection, mind you, and so, you know, I'm being very picky about when I buy games and what is within these physical products that I am purchasing. So originally, The Outer Worlds wasn't gonna come with a cartridge. It was just gonna be a little code, so they were just selling you plastic. But for those of you who were paying close attention, The Outer Worlds was supposed to launch on Switch around this year in March, and people were starting to just poke around the calendar and say, somewhere around this time, we're gonna hear about whatever Obsidian is doing for The Outer Worlds DLC. Now, without getting too deep into it, because we know how demonetization works and I already get paid little enough on YouTube, I don't want to ruin that anymore. Let's just say things happened in our world where we went into a state of lockdown. This hampered game development. This also led to, as I said, the delay of The Outer Worlds on Switch, because Chinese developer Virtuos, who was heading up the development of The Outer Worlds on Switch, had to close down for the time being, and everyone was adjusting to working remotely, and this is before it became a much more global problem. Now, the original promise was that The Outer Worlds was going to come out on the Switch later down the line, and this delay would allow us to have a physical cartridge, but they didn't have a release date. Now we have it. It's in June, just 2 weeks from now as I upload this video. And so that brings us to what we saw with Obsidian talking about the DLC. So they had a special thank you note on their website. I believe it was at the end of December. To all those who voted for us in the Game Awards, you are all fantastic, and we are grateful for your support. The reception of The Outer Worlds has been unbelievable to see, and even just being nominated means a lot. However, the journey isn't over yet. We are excited to announce that we will be expanding the story through DLC next year, which is 2020. Details will be made available at a later date. So they didn't even say soon, they just said DLC's happening, we'll talk about it later. Now, once again, we have this whole thing happening in our world, which jumbles plans, so you really don't know what every single day in the games industry is gonna be like. There's no pattern, there's no schedule to follow, because people aren't clocking in and out like they used to. We're not going to the same building, we're not holding events, like everything changed. E3 got shut down, so things changed, and we had that Xbox Next Gen, I put this in quotes, gameplay reveal event. I had heard that there was a chance Obsidian would be there with The Outer Worlds. I didn't really buy into that source, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, because it just didn't make sense why they'd have a bunch of third-party stuff and then Obsidian's The Outer Worlds DLC. So that makes us focus on now Xbox's first-party studio event being held sometime in July. I imagine this has to be, it absolutely has to be, where we see The Outer Worlds DLC. If they were already going to announce and release the Outer Worlds DLC, they probably would have done it already because it would synchronize with the Nintendo Switch launch, which is just happening in 2 short weeks. I don't see why, if it were ready, they'd be holding on to it. So I would say all eyes on July. Xbox said that all of their first-party studios are working on Xbox Series X content as well as Game Pass content, and I'd just be very shocked if this event came and there was literally nothing when it came to the Outer Worlds, because at that point, I start to get concerned either what's happening with the development of this, or I get a little excited. How big is this DLC? The specific words expanding the story obviously stick out to a lot of folks, and I get why. How big are they going? I mean, we saw on the map there were a couple planets we were unable to explore, but a lot of that seemed to be more world building than actual places we could one day go to, because according to descriptions in the game, they really weren't planets you could even live on, you could walk on, like you die instantly. So I had a couple of ideas of what they could do. Number one is they take us to a brand new planet. There's a whole story on there, and it's just more of what we experienced with the Outer Worlds. The other thing I thought of was more along the lines of a definitive edition, making the main story bigger with more options, more things to do, because that was one of the complaints when it came to the original Outer Worlds, is that it was a very good role-playing game, but early on, you were so front-loaded with skills that it was really hard to miss any skill checks. Like, specializing in something really didn't help you out. You could become a jack of all trades, and that wouldn't hurt you in the early game. As you got deeper in the game, higher skills in certain areas would help you, but by that point, it didn't feel as impactful. So I understand that, and that's why I always wondered if they take a definitive edition route and they just rework some skill checks in the story, add more missions into the world. That to me would also be great, because there are some places you go, like Byzantium, where I would love to see more of these locations, more quests within them. You really hop into some of these locations and then immediately leave. I would like to spend more time here, and I feel like Obsidian would feel the same way, but that's also one of the biggest draws of the Outer Worlds. It's a nice, compact RPG. I know I sound like a hypocrite. I just finished a 140-hour playthrough of Persona 5 Royal. I get it, but I'm so over these gigantic open world RPGs that just milk my time for mediocre content. That was one of my biggest compliments of the Outer Worlds, is that it respected my time. I felt like I did everything without killing myself over it, and all of it, from my perspective, was actually quite enjoyable. With that said, I wouldn't hate if they added more permutations to the story, more options for the player, and expanded it that way. But then you go back to the Switch version, why would they just release vanilla Outer Worlds on the Switch if they had this whole definitive edition in the works? And what's gonna happen with the DLC when it comes to the Switch version? That's why the way they're marketing this whole thing is a little confusing. But anyway, in answer to the question of where is it, I think a safe answer here is it's not really a DLC and more along the lines of an expansion. It's far bigger than we really had expected, because if this were a tiny, compact piece of content that you could beat in a couple hours, it probably would be already done by now. Look for it in July. I would say that's a pretty safe bet. I've personally heard that Obsidian will be attending this event and showing some pretty neat stuff off, stuff that you guys should pay close attention to. But that's if it's true, which, you know, I trust this source and they've been right with stuff they've told me in the past, so take that as you will. But I just want to put that out there because I know a lot of people are looking for what's going on with Obsidian, the Outer Worlds on Switch, and its DLC and the future of that company. I think July is a pretty safe place to look. One thing that I do want to make sure I cover is the possibility of a cancellation. I don't think that makes sense whatsoever, but still, it's worth visiting just because it has been so long, and while I like the Outer Worlds a lot, it was one of those games, like many, that sort of come and go, and I do wonder if Obsidian recognizes that the demand isn't as high. Like, even when they tweet things out, you'll see, for example, not too many people asking about the DLC, just a couple here and there. And I'm not saying that Twitter mentions by any stretch of the imagination should determine the interest of doing a product or not, but I just also wonder if they thought to themselves, you know what, it would be more intelligent of us to invest all our resources in this new game that we're making for next generation consoles and maybe up their alley even more, and they could do even more with this game than they could have ever imagined with the Outer Worlds, where they're almost holding themselves back by creating DLC for that game. That's just one thought that crossed my mind. I don't think it would ever happen. I think they would have said something by this point in time, but it's still something worth considering at the very minimum. Anyway, are you guys still excited for the Outer Worlds DLC, or has that really just kind of gone off your radar and you don't care at this point in time? I'm personally still looking forward to it. I feel like we're in a bit of an RPG limbo outside of Persona 5 Royal. It feels like we're waiting on a lot of RPGs. Like we're waiting on Mass Effect, we're waiting on Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, we're waiting on Starfield, we're waiting on Cyberpunk. Like we're waiting on all these incredible looking RPGs. Of course, add The Outer Worlds and its DLC to that list. There's so many things we're waiting for that it's like a bit of an RPG lull. So are you excited for more of The Outer Worlds DLC? Let me know in the comments down below. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. Big thank you to all of the patrons who have signed up and continue to slay. Appreciate each and every single one of you. And I'll talk with you soon. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.